Welcome back. It is Wednesday, which means it is Panic Index Day. Every second Wednesday, Panic Index, and same guidelines as usual. At the top, this is where fans, media, teams are going to be very happy, somewhat happy, concerned. Anger goes here. It's Homer strangling Bart anger. Panic is here, and then the phone down here signifies teams that are just they're waiting for the draft lottery and a phone call saying, "Hey, you get the number one draft pick, and we'll see if Hagens is the number one draft pick next year or not." There are various candidates for that number one draft pick spot, and there are some teams who may very well be curious to see if they get that number one draft pick. So I've got these teams in a random order, but I'm going in division. So we're starting with the Pacific. Vegas, there's no reason not to think Vegas is going to be pretty happy right now. They don't have a fantastic record over the last month, but they're playing well enough. Likely to get Stone back tonight. I haven't seen confirmation he's back tonight, but very likely is. And so the Vegas Golden Knights, yeah, things are going pretty well. Vancouver, I can't put them at the very top. The Hronik injury is definitely of concern. Of course, Miller's still out, and Demko's not back yet. So with the players who are missing, I can't really put Vancouver on the top row, but 4-1-1 on that road trip, that is a very respectable record. Now they come home and bring the road game home. I want them to bring the road game home. San Jose. You know, the way the Sharks are playing right now, I don't see any reason why Sharks fans wouldn't be excited about things. Now, this is where the standings come in, too. I don't know that the standings matter. It just feels like San Jose is on an upswing right now. And when was the last time we said that? Maybe 5 years ago? But in reality, probably not, because 5 years ago we were making the argument, they might need to go into a rebuild soon or something like that. So it's been a while since the San Jose Sharks were on an upswing in the standings. Seattle, it depends on the day, doesn't it? Seattle, I'm going to put them under concerned. I'm not going to put them under panicked or angry. The back-to-back losses against San Jose hurt, but then they win in Carolina last night. So in terms of where they're at right now, I'll put them in concern, and we'll see whether or not that changes over the next couple of weeks. But Seattle is kind of in that region where they could jump back into a playoff spot, they could go on a bit of a run, or fall right off. Calgary. I'm going to put Calgary here. They did have a rough road trip, so they come back home. They get the win over Columbus, but there's still got to be some concerns, I would think. Not a lot. Not enough to put them down on that third level, but second level, I don't feel like putting them at the top level would necessarily work. The expectations that Calgary is going to fall away, still there. I don't know that they're necessarily going to. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. The Edmonton Oilers, I'm going to put the Oilers on the same row. Not concerned, not at the top of the board either. Last night's game against Vegas is a good example. They played pretty well. They didn't get a goal. So you play pretty well. That's a reason to be happy, but not getting a goal could be a cause for concern. And for the Oilers, there's been some up and down play this season. The Kings. I'm going to put the Kings on the top row. Kings fans very excited about how the team's doing right now. I saw that with the power rankings. So Kings fans are very excited about where the team's at right now. They're playing well. At home, away from home, they've played pretty well in both locations, which is important. It's something they were not really able to do that well early last season. So the fact that this year things are better at home than last year should bode well for them, and should bode well for them making the playoffs as well. Anaheim. Anaheim's a tough one. I mean, they're at NHL 500. I don't know that there's a lot more that's expected of them. Fans aren't going to be angry. They're not going to be panicked. So these are out. I don't think they're in that we're waiting for the draft lottery either. Does this work for Anaheim fans? I feel like it should. So in the Pacific Division, 3 teams in the top row, 4 teams in the second row, and Seattle as the only one with concerns at this point. Not too shabby. So we go to the Central Division. St. Louis feels like they belong in that okay level too. St. Louis, since the coaching change, things have gone pretty darn well. They win that game in Winnipeg last night. So, yeah, I don't see any reason not to have St. Louis that high up. They're trending in the right direction. Winnipeg, on the other hand, you know what? They've won 3 out of 10. I'm gonna put them next to Panic at this point. The Winnipeg Jets, are not dealing with a lot of injuries either. So it's not like you can look and say, well, they're really beat up. Like you got Ehlers out. There's not a whole lot of players, though, that are out for them. And they have good depth. So the fact that they're 3-7 in their last 10, I would think, yeah, you might be able to put them under panicked. That being said, since they're still pretty high up in the standings, concern is probably the more realistic place. But this is what awaits them if they have 2 more weeks like the last 2 weeks they've had. Nashville. I mean, is there anger in Nashville? Is there panic in Nashville? Or are the Preds just kind of, at this point in time, with the record that they have, are we looking at a team that's just kind of waiting for the draft lottery? So I'm putting Nashville next to the phone because I feel like, yeah, this season's probably at a loss. It'll be interesting to see what Barry Trotz does going forward, but I'm going to put Nashville right there. Minnesota, no reason not to have Minnesota at the top of the board, is there? The Minnesota Wild have had a fantastic season thus far. Minnesota, 17-4-4, only 4 regulation losses in their first 25 games. That really says everything, and they're able to come back from behind. Kaprizov is that superstar player that they needed for the first 20 plus years of their existence. And so, yeah, things are pretty good in Minnesota. Utah, I mean, there's got to be some concern with the overall play. They're 10-10-4. They did get that win over Vegas. We'll see if they're able to continue their winning ways in the upcoming weeks. But for Utah, I'm just going to put them under concerned. Dallas is a tough one. It does feel like with Dallas, they're getting enough wins that I don't feel like concern works, but the OK row might be the best place for Dallas at this stage. They're losing enough games, and bewilderingly so, like the one against Chicago being the most bewildering, that I do feel like that's the best spot for them. Chicago goes right next to the phone. I could try to make an argument that Chicago, there's got to be anger or frustration and panic. I don't know that there is, and even if there's a bit of that, the reality is we didn't expect anything from Chicago this year. So the fact that they're, looking at one of the worst records in the NHL, but still better than last year, I think that's kind of what we expected from them. So Chicago, right next to that phone. Colorado, I'm putting him next to panic. They have not fixed the goaltending, although what we saw last night, maybe Wedgwood is going to hit the ground running in Colorado, which of course isn't really a thing. It's just a saying. Just like bull in a china shop. If you haven't watched the Mythbusters on that, I can't say that anymore because I watched the Mythbusters and I'm like, that bull is not touching anything. He's just right down the middle. Anyways, so the Colorado Avalanche, I'm going to put them next to panic. It does feel like there's a lot of concern, and it's just the goaltending, which I mean it's not a small minor thing or anything, but it's not like they're playing awful offensively. Yes, the defense could use some help too, but I do think part of it is that when as a defense you know that your goaltender's been struggling, I think you play different. I think they're a team that's played different defensively because their goaltending's struggling. Could the goaltenders be playing a little bit different because the defense is struggling? Maybe. So maybe it feeds back on itself, right? But either way, I can see reason for panic, even with that 4-goal comeback, and they win 5-4 last night. I do think there's good reason for panic with Colorado. You don't want to be losing another season of Rantanen, McKinnon, Makar in their prime because you can't figure out the goaltending. Then we go to the East. So the West, we got 4 teams in the top row. Only 1 from the Central there. I've got 2 from the Central here, 2 from the Central here, 1 here, and 2 here. So less panic in the Pacific than the Central. Who knew? Now we go to the Atlantic Division. Ottawa. I feel like at this point, Ottawa, it's anger. They were supposed to be out of this rebuild by now. This was promised a while ago, and it still hasn't happened. So yeah, I feel like with Ottawa, that's where we're at right now, is the anger side of things, which is, of course, one of those stages of grief. But panic isn't one of those stages of grief. Maybe it should be. Maybe panic should be a stage of grief. But for Ottawa, the anger works there. Tampa, I'm going to put Tampa next to concerned because it does depend on the game, doesn't it? Sometimes Tampa looks really good, and other times, not as much. And I do think that their days as like a top contender for the Cup, probably done. But that next level down where a team could go on a run and maybe win one, I would put Tampa in that category. So I'm not going to put them up here, but I'm not going to put them in this area either. That would be ridiculous. Florida. If I was doing this a week ago, there might have been some panic, might have been some concern, but I'm going to put Florida. The back-to-back wins over Carolina, it's hard not to argue them up here. So I'm going to do that, even though in their last 10, they're 4-5-1, but they're trending in the right direction. Winning some games. They did only get the point last night against Pittsburgh, but I felt like that was also a sign Pittsburgh really desperately needs wins. They're finally putting it together. So the Florida Panthers stay in the top row. The Toronto Maple Leafs are going to go in the top row with them. There have been times where people haven't liked me putting Toronto in the top row. I don't know that it can be argued Toronto doesn't belong in the top row right now. With the injuries they've had and still putting together a decent record, no reason not to have Toronto in the top row, at least in my opinion. You guys can let me know your thoughts. There's always going to be articles questioning Toronto. Always. That's how the whole clicking thing works. People will click on those articles questioning Toronto and whether or not they're going to win. So that's just it. Buffalo. I'm going to put them next to angry too. Absolutely. Buffalo Sabres shouldn't be blowing a 4-goal lead after the first period. 4-1 lead after the second period. Not when they desperately need wins. So Buffalo gets wins here and there, and it looks like they're getting it together, and then they throw it away. So some anger, I think, in Buffalo, and I totally get that. Montreal, despite getting Laine back and having an overall positive record, I think Montreal is still firmly in the rebuild. And getting Laine back will help their attack, absolutely. But I think Montreal's still committed to this rebuild, and I don't think their focus is changing, and I think fans understand that too. I don't think there's a lot of expectations from fans. Detroit, I got to put Detroit in that anger category too. Ottawa, Buffalo, Detroit, to me it's interesting how all three of these teams have a very similar issue in that they've been out of the playoffs forever. It feels like they should be, moving up in the standings, and they're just not. It's not happening. Boston. Boston's been playing better since the coaching change, so I'm going to put Boston here. We know that you get that coaching bump. So the question then becomes, how long will this bump last? What does that do for them in the standings? Does that mean that they're going to be buyers at the deadline? Does that mean that they're going to look to make additions before that? We'll see. But yeah, that's Boston. So in the Atlantic Division, I've got 2 teams in the top, 1 team in the second row, 1 team here, 3 teams here, and 1 here. So there's a definite separation, in my eyes, of the top 4 from the other 4. That you've got Boston, or Florida, Toronto, Boston, Tampa. Those are the teams that are most likely to make the playoffs, and the other 4, a lot of anger to go around there. All right, so we get to the Metro Division, the final division, and the Washington Capitals have to go here. They did lose last night in overtime against San Jose at home, but San Jose's playing really well. That's the reason that San Jose's in the top row. The Capitals playing quite well without Ovechkin. It really hasn't hurt their record as much as one might have expected, and Ovechkin's trending towards a return. So they're definitely looking like they're going to get through this just fine. Pittsburgh, I don't think belongs in panic. I think with the 4 wins in a row, I'm going to put them here. I'm going to put them in, not the top row, but the next row down. The winning streak is encouraging for Pittsburgh, and this is one of those things that I've said for years. I'll say it again here. I never really count Pittsburgh out. I don't, because I've watched enough hockey over the decades to know when you count Pittsburgh out, they tend to hurt you. Either through a draft lottery where they end up with Crosby, and of course they had Malkin the year before that, and back in the 80s, before there was a draft lottery, you get Lemieux. So even when they're down, Pittsburgh still ends up hitting gold, basically. Hitting the jackpot, better way of putting it. And yeah, Pittsburgh I'm going to put right there. Philadelphia, it really depends on the day. Things are trending in the right direction, though. But I'm going to put them under a little bit concerned just because it still feels like if they're going to make a push for the playoffs, do they have the goaltending to do that? Do they have enough scoring? And does management want to make that push? Do they want to buy? I have to pick up that magnet. But do they want to buy assets if they need to? We shall see. Let me go ahead and grab that magnet. Just landed on my pant leg, so I don't have to go all the way down to the floor, which at my age is always well appreciated. But yeah, Philadelphia I'm going to put right there. I could have put them on this row. Obviously, you can't put them down here. Not a lot of teams getting in that anger or panic side of things. New Jersey. New Jersey fans got to be pretty happy with things right now. Hughes is firing on all cylinders. And they went in and spanked the Rangers the other night. So, yeah, for the Devils, things are going pretty darn well. And I don't see any reason to think that that's necessarily going to change anytime soon. The New York Rangers, definitely some panic around the Rangers. Absolutely, and rightfully so. The Rangers did have that one win over Montreal, which it is interesting to hear reporters talk about it. So Elliot Friedman said on Saturday night that win over Montreal kind of made some of the noise in New York kind of dull down a little bit. So it's really a day-to-day thing. One day to the next, you don't know if management's going to be upset with things or happy with things. I don't know what message that sends to the team either, but yeah, the Rangers, there's definitely got to be some concerns. This is a team that should be much better than what they have been for the last 2 to 3 weeks. The Islanders, I mean, is it panic? They only have 9 wins. And it does kind of feel like they're spinning their wheels. One thing with the Islanders is it feels like we've been here, we've done this for years. It's a team that may very well peg off enough wins that they end up getting themselves into the playoffs, but they'd probably be in a first round exit again. So for the Islanders, I mean, does that qualify as concern? Does that qualify as panic? Do I put them next to the phone? Panic feels wrong. Anger doesn't feel right either. I'm going to put them right here. I do feel like for the Islanders this year, I don't think it's going to happen. Sorokin's played quite well. Varlamov's played better lately. They don't score. They don't get enough goals, and they're an aging team as well. So I feel like the best spot for the Islanders, the most likely spot that they belong, is next to the phone. Columbus. At home, things are great. On the road, not as much. So I'm not going to put them next to panicked or angry. I'm going to put them right next to the kind of concerned. They need to be better on the road, more consistent on the road if they get there. And if they can maintain their home record, Columbus could very well be a playoff team. But the game last night against Calgary, not necessarily just that they lose, but they don't generate very many shots. Only 16 shots. And that's been the curious thing. At home, their offense is fantastic. And on the road, it is not. Carolina. Is there panic in Carolina at this point? I mean, the goaltending, there could be. They had the back-to-back ugly losses against Florida. I'm gonna put them in concerned. I'm gonna chicken my way out of this one and put them right smack dab in the middle of the board as concerned. Technically, yes, the middle of the board would be in between these two, but there's no row there, so middle of the board becomes concerned for me, anyways. So yeah, Carolina in the middle. Losing against Seattle, and the way Seattle controlled large stretches of that game either tells you Seattle had a fantastic game or Carolina had a bad game or a little bit of both. So, yeah, the panic index this week, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams in the top, 2 from the Metro, 2 from the Atlantic, 1 from the Central, and 3 from the Pacific. The second row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So half the league is in these top rows. And you've got 4 from the Pacific, 2 from the Central, 1 from the Atlantic, and 1 from the Metro. The concern category, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 1 team from the Pacific, 2 from the Central, 1 from the Atlantic, and 3 from the Metro there. And then the anger stage, all 3 from the Atlantic. The 3 teams we've already discussed. The 2 panic teams, 1 from the West out of the Central in Colorado, 1 from the East in the New York Rangers, and then the teams that I feel like are just kind of waiting for the phone call of, hey, here's where you are in the draft lottery. Nashville and Chicago in the Central, Chicago in the Atlantic, or Montreal in the Atlantic, and because CH, right, Chicago. And then the New York Islanders in the Metro. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. And again, the panic index is always meant to be just a fun thing I do every couple of weeks and looking at where things stand. So if you haven't already hit like and subscribe, please do. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.